1937. America is desperately trying to claw its way out of the suffocating grip of the Great Depression. The air is thick with despair, poverty, and the looming shadow of a new war. And in this darkness, Walt Disney orchestrates a revolution. He releases Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, the first full-length animated feature in history. It was a cultural bomb that detonated in the collective subconscious of the entire planet. Pale skin, blood-red lips, innocent eyes, and charming songs surrounded by forest animals. Disney gifted the world a perfect, polished fairy tale about the absolute triumph of good over evil. He sold us the dream that even in the darkest hour, you just need to have faith and your prince will inevitably come. It was a sweet, sugar-coated pill that the world was starving for. But Walt Disney wasn't a genius storyteller just because he could invent magical worlds. No, he was a genius because he was a virtuoso at hiding the truth. He was the ultimate censor. If he had dared to show what Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm actually wrote in their original manuscripts, the audience wouldn't have been applauding with tears of joy. They would have been sprinting out of the theaters in sheer terror, covering their children's eyes and ears, screaming for the projectionist to cut the reel. Because the true Snow White is not a romance. It is not a lullaby. It is a clinical chronicle of psychopathology, cannibalism, and sophisticated torture masked as children's folklore. To understand the depth of this nightmare, we need to rewind the clock. We need to go back to the early 19th century, to a Germany that looked nothing like the fairy tale landscapes we imagine. Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm were never the kindly grandfathers reading stories by the fireplace. They were linguists. They were cold, academic scientists who collected folklore with ruthless German pedantry. And this folklore was as cruel, dirty, and unforgiving as the life of a medieval peasant. In 1812, the first edition of their collection was published. And this book is radically different from the sanitized plastic version we know today. Disney, and even the Brothers Grimm themselves in later, softer editions, committed a historical forgery. They performed surgery on the text, cutting out the most terrifying, taboo crime a human being is capable of committing. Do you remember the evil queen? The haughty, cold stepmother who hated her stepdaughter for her beauty. Erase that image from your mind. It is a lie. It is a fabrication designed to protect your fragile psyche. In the original manuscript, the stepmother did not exist. When the door to the nursery creaked open, it wasn't a stranger who entered. Standing over the sleeping 7-year-old girl, clutching a knife, was her own mother. Let that sink in. The biological mother of Snow White was the monster who decided to exterminate her own child out of a banal, consuming envy. This isn't just a plot twist. This is a dive into the darkest corners of human psychology. In modern psychiatry, there is even a term for this: Snow White syndrome. It describes a pathological state where an aging mother views her blossoming daughter not as a child, but as a direct threat to her own femininity, her sexuality, and her power. The Grimms recorded exactly this: a generational conflict pushed to the absolute limit, to a bloody resolution. Later, when these stories gained mass popularity, editors and publishers panicked. They insisted on a change. The image of a mother murderer was too shocking, too blasphemous for the Christian morality of the time. A mother cannot do this, they said. So they rewrote history. They shifted the blame onto the convenient villain, the evil stepmother. But we know the truth. The visceral horror of the original lies precisely in the violation of the most sacred bond in nature: the bond between a mother and her child. But envy was merely the motive. The method the queen chose to eliminate her competition makes the Disney version look like a kindergarten play. In the cartoon, the queen orders the huntsman to take the princess into the woods, kill her, and bring back her heart in a box as proof. That already sounds grim, doesn't it? But the original goes much, much further. The original text drags us into the realm of ritualistic horror. In the 1812 version, the queen demands not just the heart. She craves total physical annihilation, the erasure of the girl's existence. She orders the huntsman to bring her Snow White's lungs and liver. And this specific request wasn't dictated by a simple desire to confirm the death. It wasn't forensic. It was culinary. It was preparation for a ritual. We are standing on the precipice of a scene that turns this fairy tale into a slasher movie. Because the queen didn't just want to see the bloody organs. She ordered the court cook to boil them. She wanted them prepared with salt and spices. And then, in her luxurious dining hall, under the light of chandeliers, this woman sat at the table and ate the lungs and liver, fully convinced she was consuming the flesh of her own 7-year-old daughter. This is an act of cannibalism rooted in ancient barbaric superstition. Eat your enemy, and their strength passes to you. The queen believed that by digesting Snow White's internal organs, she would absorb her youth, steal her beauty, and become immortal in her perfection. Just imagine the visual. A mother savoring every bite, chewing on what she believes is part of her child. Disney would never have dared to show you this dinner. But for the medieval listener, this was a vital lesson. Evil doesn't just want to kill you, it wants to consume you. It wants to erase your essence. Snow White ran into the forest. She escaped the huntsman's knife, but she had no idea that the real nightmare was only just beginning. Because the mirror on the wall never lies. And very soon, the queen will learn that her meal was a deception, and her hated rival is still breathing. The magic mirror is perhaps the most ruthless artifact in the history of storytelling. It possesses no mercy, and it is incapable of telling a white lie to save a soul. When the queen, intoxicated by her perceived victory and her grisly dinner, stood before it once more to reclaim her title as the most beautiful, the mirror struck her with a verbal blow that shattered her reality. "You are beautiful, it is true," it whispered, "but Snow White, beyond the 7 mountains, with the 7 dwarfs, is still more beautiful." Imagine the volcanic rage that erupted in that moment. The queen had just committed the ultimate sin. She had crossed every human and divine law by consuming, as she believed, the flesh of her own daughter, and it was all for nothing. Her sacrifice was a failure. The huntsman had deceived her. It is here that the fairy tale sheds its skin and reveals itself as a relentless slasher. The queen realizes that if she wants the job done, she must do it herself. No more intermediaries. This is now a personal vendetta. She retreats to her secret chamber, a place where the original Grimm text explicitly states she practiced black magic. She isn't just a bitter socialite, she is a practicing witch. She begins a methodical, tactical hunt. This is a detail Disney completely ignored, likely because it was too repetitive and too cruel for a family film. In the Disney version, the witch visits the cottage only once with the poisoned apple. But in the reality of the Brothers Grimm, this was a siege, a series of assassination attempts, a war of attrition where the killer returns to the scene of the crime again and again. The queen did not want a quick death. She wanted to play with her victim's naivety. And then there were the dwarfs. Forget the singing, happy-go-lucky miners of the movies. In the historical context of the German mountains, these figures represented something far more grounded and tragic. They weren't magical creatures. They were likely child miners, stunted and deformed by back-breaking labor in narrow, suffocating tunnels. Snow White wasn't living in a cottage of whimsy. She was hiding in a shelter for the broken and the exploited. The first visit was an act of pure physical violence. The queen disguised herself as an old peddler, carrying colorful laces for corsets. Snow White, seeing the bright ribbons, immediately forgot every warning the dwarfs had given her. This highlights a psychological flaw in the original character. Snow White wasn't a wise princess who spoke to animals. She was a vain child, easily swayed by beautiful things. She let the peddler inside. The mother offered to lace her new corset. The girl turned her back, trusting a stranger, and the queen pulled the laces with such inhuman strength that she cracked the girl's ribs and cut off her breath. Snow White fell dead. This wasn't magic. It was a brutal, manual strangulation. The queen left the corpse on the floor and walked away satisfied. Only pure luck saved the girl. The dwarfs returned home earlier than usual, saw she wasn't breathing, and simply cut the laces with their knives. Lungs filled with air, and life returned. You would think the lesson was learned. The dwarfs told her plainly, "That was the queen. Do not open the door to anyone." But time passed, and the mirror delivered the bad news again. Snow White was alive. Rage turned into cold calculation. If brute force failed, she had to be more subtle. For the second attempt, the queen crafted a poisoned comb. She changed her appearance again and knocked. And Snow White. She opened the door again. We are conditioned to see her as a victim, but the Grimms show us a terrifying pattern. Evil always finds a loophole through our own weaknesses. Snow White wanted to be beautiful. She wanted that comb. As soon as the crone pushed it into the girl's hair, a potent toxin surged through her scalp and into her bloodstream. Snow White collapsed in convulsions. Again, the dwarfs arrived in the nick of time. They pulled the comb out, and she regained consciousness. Twice she had been clinically dead. Twice she had been resuscitated. In a modern context, we would call this a medical miracle. But in the realm of medieval mystery, it looks more like a curse. Death follows her every step, but it refuses to take her permanently. Back at the castle, the queen is hysterical. The mirror remains impassive. Snow White is alive. It is time for Plan C, the final act. The queen realizes that laces and combs are half measures. She needs something that hits from the inside, something that cannot be cut away or pulled out. She descends into the deepest, darkest room of the castle, a place no one else dared to enter. There, she creates the masterpiece of her hatred, the apple. Disney showed us an apple dipped in a potion, manifesting a skull. Effective, but the original was far more genius. The apple was engineered. One half, the white and rosy side, was poisoned, while the other half was clean. This was a tool for psychological manipulation. The queen knew Snow White was now terrified and suspicious. She knew the door wouldn't simply open. So, she prepared a performance. The third visit. Snow White watches through the window, trembling. She says, "I am not allowed to let anyone in." But the kind peasant woman doesn't insist. She simply offers a gift. "Are you afraid it's poisoned?" she asks. "Look, I'll take a bite myself." And the queen, right before Snow White's eyes, bites into the clean half. This is the most devilish moment in the entire story. She weaponizes trust. She shatters the last defensive barrier. Snow White sees the old woman eat and not die, and her childlike mind surrenders to the temptation. She reaches out through the window, takes the poisoned half, and takes that one fatal bite. This time, the dwarfs will be powerless. There is no lace to cut, no comb to remove. The poison stopped her heart instantly. Death, at long last, had claimed its prize. The dwarfs found her on the floor, breathless, cold. This time they exhausted every ritual they knew. They unlaced her corset, searched her hair for a hidden comb, and washed her face with water and wine. But Snow White remained motionless. The miracle didn't happen. For 3 days and 3 nights, the 7 little men sat around the body and mourned her. By all the laws of nature and tradition, she should have been lowered into the damp earth on the 4th day, surrendered to the worms and to oblivion. But then, something strange happened, something bordering on the supernatural. The body did not decay. Death had taken her soul, but it refused to touch her flesh. Her cheeks remained rosy, her skin as white as snow. She didn't look like a corpse, she looked like a sleeping beauty frozen in time. And it is in this moment that the love of the dwarfs, which previously seemed touching, takes on a deeply unsettling hue. They couldn't bring themselves to part with her. They couldn't bear to hide such beauty beneath the dirt. They made a decision that transformed the forest clearing into a literal mausoleum. The dwarfs commissioned a transparent glass coffin. It was a vessel that allowed her to be viewed from every angle. They inscribed her name and royal title in gold letters and put her on public display at the top of a mountain. One of the dwarfs always stayed on guard. For years, Snow White lay there like a museum exhibit, like a beautiful doll in a shop window, never changing and never aging. Birds, animals, and nature itself came to witness this phenomenon. But one day, a man came to the coffin. Disney presented the prince as a savior, a romantic hero who searched for his beloved through a song. But let's be honest, in the original Grimm version, the prince was just passing by. By accident, he had never seen Snow White alive. He didn't know her voice, her character, or her laughter. He saw a glass box in the middle of a forest, and inside it, the perfectly preserved corpse of an incredibly beautiful girl. And what does our hero do? He doesn't try to find her killer. He doesn't pray for the repose of her soul. He falls in love, but not with a person, with an object. This is a classic example of fetishism bordering on necrophilia. The prince sees a dead girl and thinks, "I want that for myself." The dialogue between the prince and the dwarfs is perhaps the most uncomfortable scene in the entire story, one that children's adaptations carefully avoid. The prince begins to haggle. He offers the dwarfs gold, jewels, anything they want if they will only sell him the coffin with the body inside. The dwarfs, to their credit, initially refuse, stating they wouldn't give her up for all the gold in the world. But the prince is relentless. He begins to beg and plead, preying on their pity. He tells them, "I cannot live without seeing her. I will honor her as my most precious treasure." Think about those words. He wants to take a corpse back to his castle, put it in his room, and just stare. This is not the behavior of a lovesick youth. It is the behavior of an obsessed collector. Eventually, the dwarfs cave. They hand over the coffin. The deal is struck. What happens next completely destroys the myth of the kiss of love. There was no kiss. That was a 20th century marketing invention. In the harsh reality of 1812, everything was decided by raw physics and human error. The prince orders his servants to lift the heavy glass coffin and carry it behind him to the castle. The servants were, to put it mildly, not thrilled. Dragging a box with a dead body through thickets and over roots is a miserable task. The versions of what happened next vary, but both are equally cynical. In one version, the servants simply stumbled over a stray root, giving the coffin a violent jolt. In another, darker version, one of the servants grew so angry at this pointless labor that he opened the lid, lifted Snow White up, and struck her in the back, cursing, "We have to suffer all day because of this dead girl." The result was the same. The sudden shock caused the piece of poisoned apple, which had been lodged in Snow White's throat and blocking her airway, to simply fly out. It was an accidental, crude, involuntary resuscitation. The Heimlich maneuver performed by fate itself. The girl took a deep breath, opened her eyes, and asked in terror, "My God, where am I?" She didn't wake up from a tender touch of lips. She woke up in a forest, in a coffin, surrounded by strange men who were dragging her off to an unknown destination. The prince, seeing that his exhibit had come to life, was overjoyed, but not because a human life was saved, because his trophy had become even more valuable. Without even giving her a moment to recover, he immediately declared, "You will come with me and be my wife." Snow White, essentially, had no choice. She had traded one captivity for another. The preparations for the wedding began, a celebration that was supposed to be the ultimate triumph of good over evil. But the Brothers Grimm knew a deeper truth. In the real world, balance is only restored through blood. While the prince's castle buzzed with the excitement of the upcoming feast, an invitation was sent out across the land, reaching the ears of the evil queen. She had no idea that the bride she was invited to see was the very daughter she had tried to erase from existence. Her vanity was her undoing. The mirror had spoken of a young queen who surpassed her in beauty. And consumed by a fresh wave of jealousy, she decided to attend the ceremony just to look upon her rival. She didn't realize she was walking toward her own execution. The finale of this story wouldn't be marked by the ringing of wedding bells, but by the hiss of glowing iron and screams of agony that seemed to make the very paper of the original manuscript smoke. The wedding feast was in full swing when the queen entered the throne room. She walked with her head held high, confident in her own radiance, ready to humiliate the unknown beauty. But when she looked at the bride, her heart stopped. Standing there, alive and well in her wedding gown, was the girl whose lungs and liver she thought she had consumed years ago. The girl she had strangled, poisoned, and left for dead. Snow White looked back at her, and in that gaze there was no mercy, no forgiveness. The queen's survival instinct screamed at her to run, but the doors had already been bolted. The trap had snapped shut. This wasn't just a celebration, it was a carefully orchestrated revenge. In the corner of the hall, inside a massive fireplace, a pair of iron shoes had been heating in the coals until they glowed white with heat. The Grimm version describes what followed with a chilling, clinical detachment. Servants used heavy tongs to pull the red-hot iron shoes from the fire and drop them directly in front of the queen. There was no trial, no final words. She was given an ultimatum: put them on or be forced. With the eyes of the court upon her, the queen thrust her feet into the burning metal. The smell of scorched flesh instantly filled the hall. The pain was so astronomical that standing still was an impossibility. The only way to find a microsecond of relief was to shift her weight, to hop, to move. And so she began to dance. This was a frantic, wild dance of death. The guests watched as the once majestic queen jumped through clouds of smoke and sparks, emitting inhuman shrieks of pain. The most disturbing part of this scene isn't the torture itself, it's the reaction of our heroes. Snow White and the prince didn't turn away in horror. They didn't weep. They watched. For the medieval mind, this was the definition of justice.